Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Growth Department Podcast. We're kicking things off with one of the most important topics in business growth, finding the right people for your org. My guest, Dr. David S. Cohen, shares how values-based hiring and behavioral interviewing can help you build a team that actually gives your company culture.
You want to have people that you can sleep well at night that are going to do the right thing at the right time. They might come from different backgrounds, which means they're going to have a diversity of thought, giving you different perspectives. But after that argument is over, you'll all, sing Kumbaya and go out and have lunch together, and there'll be no hard feelings. But if you're coming at it from different values, you will have hard feelings, and there'll be discontent in the organization.
Hello, today's guest is Dr. David S. Cohen, who's the founder of DS Cohen and Associates Group, which is a firm that helps companies transform their hiring by focusing on alignment, not just experience. So, hey, David, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
How did you get passionate about this hiring for fit and for values subject?
Well, values has always been a big part of my life. I grew up in a family which was very focused on values and what we considered social justice and doing the right thing. And it followed me through my career. I did my doctorate in moral education, teaching ethics. And when I left education and transitioned to business, it was a natural segue to look for the behaviors that differentiate organizations. And as soon as I realized it really was the culture. Culture is based on values. What are the behaviors of the values? You understand the behaviors of the culture. So that's quick snapshot of how I got to where my focus is.
When I think of company values, I see a page on a website that has integrity, passion, and that's what I think of first. As a marketer, I've been asked to put those slides together, and I'm like, what does this really mean?
Yeah.
What is a good handle on company values that mean something?
Yeah, you ask you right. I mean, your observation is bang on. I have a presentation I call, wall decor. And because everybody has the same thing. Well, first of all, let me start off with something which is not necessarily popular. Integrity is not a value, in my opinion. And you'll understand it as I define values. Integrity is the sum total of living your values. You have integrity when you live your values. That's because your values are strongly held beliefs, emotionally charged, highly resistant to change, and universally applied. So whether you're the founder, the CEO, or whether you're the new employee, those behaviors of the values apply to you equally. There's no hierarchy of values. You can't be, what I always say is, like, you can't be a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or not. Your values are you either have them or you don't. It's black and white. So what are those values? And for instance, values don't always, even those things you see on the wall on the website, such as respect, it doesn't mean the same thing in every organization. And geographically, around the world, they mean very different things. For instance, in Southeast Asia, respect is deference to your boss, deference to people who are older than you. And disagreeing with them publicly could cause you to great embarrassment. And if you cause them embarrassment, they're not going to speak to you. They're not going to cooperate. So if a boss says something to a group of employees in Southeast Asia the employees disagree with, they'll say nothing. They'll nod their head what we think is yes in the West, which only means in Southeast Asia is I heard of you, I heard you, and I might even think you're an idiot, but you're the boss, and I'll smile and go along with it, at least appear to go along with it. In the Gulf region, which comes from a tribal background historically, respect means socializing an idea with everybody that's impacted by that idea before you agree to it, before you bring it even forward. Respect in Europe is, from a point of view of a corporate setting, is if the boss says something you disagree with, the team sort of meets privately and says, who's got the best relation to take the boss out for a beer and tell him that we disagree? In the United States in particular, respect is speaking your mind. So if the boss says something in a meeting that you disagree with, you're going to speak out and say, I think there's a different way of doing it. Now, if I did that in Southeast Asia, or if I did that in the Gulf region, or if I did that in Europe, there'd be different levels of consequences. So even though the word respect seems to be a universal understanding, it's not. So the biggest problem organizations have is first, they don't even define their values correctly. And second, they don't understand that there's behaviors which are unique to their organization, which make them their values. So I always say there's overt and covert values. The overt values are the ones on the website. The covert values are the values that define success in the organization. When they're one and the same, you have a healthy organization. So if you're going to create a healthy organization, you have to hire people that fit your values, because they might come from different backgrounds. They might come from different religions. They might come from different educational systems, which means they're going to have a diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. You're going to have all sorts of different, people giving you different perspectives. But after that argument is over, after that disagreement's over, you'll all, sing Kumbaya and go out and have lunch together, and there'll be no hard feelings. But if you're coming at it from different values, after that disagreement's over, you will have hard feelings and there'll be discontent in the organization. So hiring for values is fundamental to having a healthy organization. You can teach skills and knowledge. You're not going to teach behaviors that fit a value very quickly. That's a long explanation.
Well, it was great. If we're talking about a big global company and they've got offices in these different regions, then they're thinking, or they should be thinking about what the values that are on the website and that they're talking about mean in those regions. If you're just in one region, say your company's just in the US, is there a simplified way to say this makes sense to everybody or define your values as a company?
Yeah, the way of defining your values as your company is what I call your moments of truth, your corporate legends. In my book, Inside the Box, which is about corporate values and leadership and how leaders are successful, and I do a deep dive into how to find and define your values. Organizations need to find out what was that moment of crisis where their values were challenged and how did they react? Where there was something which was very difficult to deal with. It might have been a crisis. It might have been an accident on the shop floor. It might have been somebody who suddenly has a child who is very sick. And therefore, I'll give you an example. I work with Michelin tires for many years. And one of the values of Michelin is quality of people, quality of process, quality of people, quality of tires. Quality of people is defined about caring for our employees, basically as family, because it's a family created company. And even though it's over 100 years old, that still exists. So when I was working in Newfoundland with one of the plants there was a gentleman who just joined the organization, and he was a frontline hourly employee, new employee. And 6 months into the job, his child got very ill, and they had to transfer him to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. Now, the province only paid for one parent to go, paid a small stipend for living expenses while the child was there. And this gentleman was given time off, and he was given days off by his coworkers. They shared days off, gave him time to be in the hospital with his child. And one day, it was just before his child was leaving for Toronto, his plant manager comes to the break room and asks him how he was doing and if he was traveling with the family tomorrow to Toronto. And he said, no, I have to work. I have to pay my bills. I have to have income. I have to do this, that, and the other thing. People have been really generous. They've shared their sick days, their days off with me, and I really can't afford to. And the general manager gives him an envelope, and in the envelope, there's a ticket for the same flight his child and his son is on. And there's a letter to the hotel next to the sick kids that said, that this is a letter confirming that Michelin will take care of all expenses, charges, all room, all food that he eats while he's there for however long it is. And it was expected to be 3 months. And he says, that's very nice. I can't afford to go because I have to pay my bills. Michelin, the general manager says, we will deposit your check every 2 weeks. Your job is to take care of your family. Now, when he came back, he did not miss a day of work for 17 years.
Wow.
While he was there, his crew actually increased the level of quality almost to 100% on his crew because of that commitment. They live those values. Now, fast forward almost 25 years, and a friend of mine who was the chief learning officer's wife had a brain injury and had to be taken care of. Same thing happened. They paid for him to move her to the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. They paid for a room for him. They set up a video conferencing in his hotel room because he was supposed to be in France every 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, but he wasn't going to go. They set up video conferencing. He was in the office for the first 2 months, maybe 3 days. So whether you were the entry-level employee or whether you were a very senior executive, we're going to treat you the same way. And that's what the values are about. I was working with a automotive parts manufacturer in Detroit, and we went through their values. And one of them was about caring for our employees. And they hired an administrative assistant. And the CEO calls me up and says, tragically, she has stage 4 cancer she just discovered. However, our insurance policy doesn't cover her because she got sick before the 6-month probationary period. And he says to me, he says, what do you think I'm supposed to, what should we do? And I said, well, what do you think you should do based on the way you worded the behaviors of the values? And he said, I thought you'd say that. And they wound up paying for her health care out of their own pocket, which was just under $1 million to make sure it was covered. Now, technically, nobody knew about that. That was between her and the company. Every employee in the organization of over 3,000 employees knew it. And morale just went through the roof. It was like, wow, we really mean these things. So those are your critical incidents. Those are your moments of truth. Those are your, images that say, okay, decode the behaviors from that and say, how do we care for our employees? Every employee should treat each other the same way. Therefore, it becomes predictable. And when the organization is predictable, how people will react to me, you have what is now referred to as a psychologically safe place to work. One thing human beings want is predictability. That uncertainty causes stress. Uncertainty causes, discontent, dissidence. But if I know that our senior leaders will always make decisions in a predictable, logical way consistent with our values, I want to work here. And in my book, Selecting the Best, which just came out, available on Amazon, it actually details a corporation in Corpus Christi, Texas, on how they evolved their values, how they applied those values to a selection system and hired employees that didn't necessarily have the full range of skill and knowledge, but they fit the behaviors. And it became a very strong, positive work environment. To me, that's the core.
You've said this a few times, values and behaviors in the same sentence. Or how does a company go about defining values as behaviors?
Yeah, that's a good question because, see, the problem is that organizations will say, let's say, respect is communicate clearly. And I kind of joke with them and say, does communicate clearly mean learning how to, you have to take a university course 101 on smoke signals or Morse code? And most younger people, when I say Morse code, look at me like, what is that? And I said, go look it up. But the reality is what is, if I observe your level of respect to your organization, and I know that managers allow people to finish their ideas before the manager replies with their idea, then I would say a behavior is allows other people to complete their thought before responding. So there needs to be an action in there that's visible. There's most organizations make the mistake and say communicates well. Communication well is a result of an action. It's an outcome. And an outcome, therefore, can be interpreted by anybody anyway. And that's where the confusion comes in. Organizations have to take a step back and say, this is the outcome, but what are the actions that led to that outcome that make it a good place to work here? What are the people that do it well? Now, a person that does communication well might not do something else well. So it doesn't mean that there's one person that does everything. It's a synthesis of the best of the different behaviors. So what are the things? When we had a crisis, let's say with a customer, what did they do? Did we make excuses? For instance, typical example is what I call the blame game. That's not my department.
Mm-hmm.
But there's organizations that I worked with that say that employees have learned, because it's their values, that we take responsibility for each other's actions and results is, that's really interesting. I'm sorry that happened. Let me help you solve it. I will make sure that Mr. So-and-so gets in touch with you because he'll have a better answer. And I'm going to call you back in 3 days. If he hasn't answered, I'm going to go and find out the answer for you. Now the person feels secure, feels taken care of. In other organizations, especially in retail, that's not my job. That's not my domain. That was shipping's problem or that was somebody else's problem. And they become, the Teflon employee that nothing sticks to because they don't live the values. So you have to dig deeper when you define the values. But if you have a collection of behaviors, you have a collection of stories, it's about stories. What are those stories that create those corporate legends that people tell each other to explain to them, this is how you work here successfully? And the simple way of looking at it is when you have a new employee that begins to do something, somebody else in the organization or somebody that seems to like them or is getting to like them or wants to help them says, oh, that's not how we do it around here. Well, then how do you do it around here? That becomes the behavioral statement. That defines for you why you're different from another organization.
If a company's already in place, like they've been around even 5, 10, 20 years, and wants to revisit this values page on their website where they don't have one, who's getting in the room and coming up with, these are the legends around our company that should be the values and define the behaviors? Who's sitting in that room and determining what these legends are?
I would say it's your employees at different levels because you want to see if they resonate from the front line to senior management. I always start with executives and I say to them, what are the values that differentiate your organization, the behaviors that are behind those? And if you can't give me incidents where you actually demonstrate those behaviors, they're just theory. And then this is the problem when they're theory. I was working with a municipality and we were going around the table and these frontline staff were saying, oh, I love working here because of this and that. This is the way I get treated and this is the way I get treated. And there's these two new employees sitting at the table. And I asked them and they were very cynical because they never saw that with their two managers. And one of the employees who'd been there a long time asked this young employee, why are you so cynical? And she said something brilliant, which became the title of an article I wrote, is they earned my cynicism. By their behavior, they earned it. And it turns out the managers they had were out of line with the rest of the organization. So by listening to your employees, you get a perception of how people perceive your living and behaving. Now, you might not like the way that's happening, but that's the reality. Or as that great American philosopher Yogi Berra once said, perception is perception, and that's reality. And that reality, whether you like it or not, is how you behave in the eyes of others. When it comes to value, here's the issue. If I'm a founder of an organization, I come to that with my values in place. I don't neatly fold my values up in the garage when I get in the car to go to work and say, I'll put them back on when I get home. Values are strongly held, emotional charge. They live with you. You hear something on the radio that bugs you, it's going to strike you that was a conflict with your values. And that goes on. Here's the problem with entrepreneurs sometimes and founders, especially if it's a family business. You'll have people that they invite into the organization because of relationships or because of knowledge that that person might have that don't have the values of the leader. And that creates conflict. Things are going well as long as, things are falling in place, they're making money or beginning to make money. But as soon as stability sets in, those values conflicts are going to set up, or even before. So hiring for fit to values has to be from day one. And an organization, let's say, that has not defined their values, they've been around 3, 4, 5 years and haven't defined their values, they have values. They just haven't defined them. Mm-hmm. They're acting already. They're making decisions. That has to come from somewhere. So, peel away the onion and get to the core of what are those things that make us a different organization? Why working at one place? You've obviously, everybody's heard the story of a gentleman, of somebody who thinks the grass is greener on the other side, gets enticed away by another organization because of or sees their hourly wages higher, goes over there, starts working there, and a couple of months later come back to the boss and says, can I have my old job back? And then you say, why? Well, it's better working here. I feel more comfortable here. Well, even though that was the same business doing the same job or a similar job with great success, they didn't feel comfortable working there. And they come back to their old firm because no two organizations have exactly the same values from a behavior point of view. The wall decor might look the same. They might have respect, integrity, trust, teamwork, innovation, etc. Now, here's the other part. Once you define your values, let's say an organization, this is one that I like, example, you define innovation as one of your values. I would argue it's probably more a strategic approach than a value, but let's say it's your value. And you define the behaviors, and you're in the finance group, and you see the value of innovation. Does that give you permission to innovate to the point where the CEO is going to go to jail because you've done something that's great for the bottom line, but violates the law? No. The interpretation of that behavior has to be within the boundaries of the job requirements and legal ramifications. So they have to be socialized. And that's another big problem that organizations do. They create these value sets and they might have a town hall meeting and a big fanfare to introduce them. And then they never take time to socialize them and say, let's understand them. Let's calibrate the meaning specific to our job function so everybody knows it. And once you do that, you also help with performance. I was just talking with a person I worked with for many years, and she actually was my partner after she left the bank she was with. And she just told me this. I never knew this before this weekend. She told me that when I came in, she was in her late 20s, was a high potential employee at a very large bank. And I did the profile, and the profile said that before you make a presentation, make sure that you have run it by people that it's accurate and that the flow is good, your skills are good, et cetera, and get their ideas to improve upon it. Something to that effect. It was worded better than that. And she said that she saw that. She never did that before. But when she saw it was in the profile, she did it. And she's done it ever since, and it's helped her a great deal because she's learned so much before she went out and talked to other people on what other people were thinking and how she might have done things that conflicted with things that already existed. And it made her more successful. So just putting it in there becomes a message, an outbound message to the employee. This is what we expect. So when you never share that with anybody, they're guessing based on their interpretation of your behavior. That's that perception thing again, on how to behave. But they're uncertain because they never get feedback from anybody to say, that's not the way we behave. Maybe because, say, I have this other theory, the more senior you are in an organization, the less likely you are to give honest feedback because senior people like to be liked and they're afraid if they tell the truth to somebody, they might not be liked. So they don't give good feedback, constructive growth feedback, and they give ambiguous feedback at best. So if you have those behaviors and they're clear, it's not about me saying to you, you're not doing a good job. It's about me saying, you're not doing this specific behavior. And then unless you do this behavior, you don't fit in here. So that gets back to the thesis of my new book, Selecting the Best, is how do you hire for people that fit your values? How do you hire for people that are going to align with your values and are going to do the right thing when nobody's looking? And by having those behaviors, you can create behavioral interview questions, which then elicit from the candidate a story, a recent story of how they acted. And when you have that, then you can match that. It's a matching game. Match it to the behaviors. Did their behavior align with our behavior? And if it's yes, great. And if it's not, and I might like them, and I might socialize with them, but they're not going to work out in our organization because I can't trust they're going to do the right thing when nobody else is around. And you want to have people that you can sleep well at night that are going to do the right thing at the right time. So how do you interview for people? You have to interview by asking behavioral questions. And unfortunately, most behavioral questions that you read on the internet are not behavioral because they guide the answer with what you did, which means you've had to do something. Maybe you didn't do anything, or when did you do it, or who did you do it with? And people can make up great stories. I always say there's a lot of great fiction in resumes, and those stories, that fiction is amplified usually at interviews because people are not asking the right question in the right way.
So before we dive fully into how to hire for fit, you need to know as a company your values, and then all of your team needs to know the values and the behaviors that go along with it, and keep reminding what it is. This is how we do it here. Here's an example. These are the behaviors, because otherwise it's very easy to forget or just look at the wall and say integrity and not really take the values and behaviors into your hiring practice.
Right. And if you don't define the behaviors, and let's say you use respect, you have one manager in one place that defines respect differently than the other, and you hire that person, and let's say that person gets transferred to your department and you had a different definition, and you always heard this person was really respectful, and they start working for you and you don't think they're respectful, then that person's manager who hired them has just lost credibility. So now you have an issue between two managers that one doesn't think the other one gets it. So by having those behaviors socialized, calibrated, mutually understood within the organization among all employees, you have consistency, you have predictability, and you have a safety that, let's say I interviewed you, I thought you were a great employee. We really didn't have a fit for you, but I realize what you bring to the organization, somebody else is looking for right now. I can go to that person and say, I have this great person for you because of A, B, C, and D, and there'd be a mutual understanding, and they'd call you in right away for an interview. But without that, I can't do that.
When you're hiring, do these behavior questions start in the job post?
No, The
No.
behavior
Okay.
questions are a result of the job post. Here's the problem with job posts. Job posts are usually based on job descriptions, which are outdated the second they're posted because something's always changing. The other problem with job descriptions, especially if you're using a recruiter or hiring, somebody to help you hire, they see the job description and they're looking to see who has the most things on the job descriptions. Some things on the job descriptions are not relevant to starting the job. They might be things you need to know or do a year or 2 years after you start the job. So you'll hire this person with high hopes because they have certain attributes that look good and they align, but they're not the ones you need day one. So here's how you correct that, in my opinion. You look for the skills, knowledge. What are the 3 or 4 things they need to do day one to be successful? And the rest of it can be developed. Because if they can't do those things day one, you're going to be spending a lot of time, or one of their coworkers spending a lot of time, not doing their job, but educating this person. It also limits the framework of the interview to the things that are necessary to be successful. So I now hire a person that actually on day one can hit the floor running, or pretty soon can hit the floor running. So it's quicker time to productivity. The behaviors are the same thing. It's what are the behaviors or the values of the organization? Now, people say, well, how many values does an organization have? The research is clear. If you have more than 5, people don't remember. And you have too many. And usually I've seen organizations that have more than 5, and 1 or 2 or 3 of them actually are semantically the same thing, just worded slightly differently. So, ideally, if you have 3, that's great. 4 is good. 5 is maximum, because people aren't going to, and you have 3 or 4 behaviors that define each one, give you that framework, because the values are like a 4-lane highway. There's room to move within those behaviors, but they're curbs, so they're guardrails on each side. And if you're going over the guardrail, you're not within the behaviors. And that's one of the reasons I called my previous book on leadership Inside the Box, because values keep you inside the box. They keep you successful. And when you deviate from them, become inventive, creative, or do the wrong behavior, you're outside the box. You're outside the organizations. So you're absolutely right. You need to have, before you start the interview, a clear set of behaviors defined, not ambiguous or not verbally expressed, but written down, that people can refer to and say, as I interpret this answer, does it match the behavior in the spirit that we wrote the behavior? And if not, they might have all the skills and knowledge in the world, but they're not getting along. So people say, what's important? And I like to use an example of a foreign exchange company. They have those booths at the airport where people go in and international flights and change money, et cetera, et cetera. And I watch them in different places for a couple of hours each time. And what I observed is, except for US currency, they don't look at the denomination. They look at the color of the currency, and they pull it that way real fast. And they're able, therefore, to make that exchange in seconds. Because if they had to pull it up and look at it and then look at it and give it back, everything else, it slows it down. And there's a long line usually just before that flight leaves or just after it arrives. So they got to be really quick. The other thing I noticed is that if the computer system goes down, and this is before cell phones, they had to be able to do division, multiplication, subtraction, addition very quickly, almost in their head, in order to make that conversion accurate. If you couldn't do those 2 things, you couldn't do the job. So that meant that the skill and knowledge that was the criteria for getting the job was you're not colorblind and you mastered the mathematical skills. So they had a colorblind test and they had a math test that you had to do in 90 seconds accurately, 100%, or you didn't get the job. Because it didn't matter if you had the right behaviors, you couldn't do the job.
Yeah.
So
Basics.
those were the two knockout factors. However, if you could do that, you had then the behavioral interview, because either you have people that can do the job, they're capable of doing the job, but they're not competent to do the job because they don't have the right behaviors. When you have capability and competency, you have a successful employee. So you have to have both. One is not more important than the other. And since if one zeroes out, if you don't have one, multiplying it by the other one, the equation, the total is zero. So you have to have both. It's easy to interview for skill and knowledge. And I know one organization, that an engineering firm, they actually give an engineering test to see if the person really understands it, but also then observe how they're doing it to see if they have the right behaviors. So there are different ways of doing that. So you have to have that defined first. What are your skills and knowledge that you need day one to start the job? What are the behaviors you need to be successful in the job? And then you can begin your interview process. Those have to be defined first.
There are a lot of companies using the applicant software now, and AI is just like filtering out the top 100, and it's looking for the keywords.
Yes.
So that first bucket of do they have the basics might kind of be faster. The question of do they have the behaviors that match our values is a little bit tougher, and I don't think software could figure that out yet.
Well, it's interesting. I was just on a webinar yesterday with an expert. There's no experts in AI yet. It's only been around for 2.5 years. It's still in its infancy. This gentleman who's got a company that does the AI for selection, et cetera, I put in the webinar a question about, if I were smart, I'd look for the keywords in the resume, in the job ad. I would put them in there, whether I could do them or not. And I get shortlisted for an interview. And he said, yeah, that's the flaw with the system. Then I asked another question about, it's more important the person has the right behaviors, but AI, the way these applicant tracking systems, ATSs, they can't understand behaviors. So you might have somebody that the system rejects because, quote, they don't have the best fit for skill and knowledge, but they have all the right behaviors. And if you don't hire that person, you're missing a diamond in the rough, but they're not even on your radar. And again, at the operation in Corpus Christi, and it's in the book, there was a gentleman that came in. They were looking for people with engineering background, and they had certain engineering requirements for the plant. It's a pet chemical plant, and a petrochemical plant, and they have to have certain engineering skills. And there's this one gentleman, military background, been working in the private sector, one of the major oil companies, and he had an engineering degree, but not in the field that they needed. But when they interviewed him, they realized he was a superstar when it came to behaviors. And then they realized that over the next 3 or 4 months, we can probably teach him everything he needs to know about that engineering background, because what he had was similar, but not exactly fit. They hired him. The general manager of the plant said to me after they hired him, let's see how this goes, because I'm doing it on faith that your process works. Because before you came, I would have never even interviewed this guy. They interviewed him. So I asked them a year later, is he still there? Yes. How's he doing? Best employee we have. So all those best employees that you didn't interview, that were rejected by ATS, good luck. That's why, people are afraid that AI is taking jobs away. I tell recruiters they'll never take your job away. If you don't use them, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. But if you do use them, realize that without the human observation of those that were rejected, you might be missing the best employees. So you're still needed, because AI needs is AI is in its infancy and we don't know where it's going. And with the new adjutant AI, which just came out, that's really scary stuff because it might actually be able to understand behaviors, but people are going to have to start putting them in the resume because they usually don't.
For sure. I've even seen we'll watch your interview questions, like we'll watch your interview recordings and see if they're lying by if their eyes go up or this go down as a software that's being sold on the
Oh,
market.
yeah. And that's illegal in the United States, by the way. It's legal outside the rest of the world. It's akin to a lie detector test. And lie detector tests are still not, you can use them,
Mhm.
but right now there's a class action suit against Workday, the largest one in the world, because it eliminates anybody over the age of 40 in its ATS, applicant tracking system. And now their class action suit has gotten certification and it is going forward. The biggest problem you have with any of this AI stuff is before you use it, have you tested it for 2 or 3 months to understand, does it fit your values? Does it fit your policies? Does it fit the things that you need it to do before you release it into the workforce? Amazon created an AI because they wanted more female applicants and employees. And they spent $1 million on this AI. And then the recruiters called up and said, this is failing. We're still only getting male applicants. And when they looked at it, the data they fed into it was only male. And as this gentleman said yesterday, AI will look for as many matches as possible. So if you make a mistake and put the word David in the AI algorithm, it's only going to produce candidates that have a name David because it wants the most possible matches. And so you got to be really careful what you put in there for the most possible matches and how you do it. And you've got to test it before you use it. I don't care whether it's Workday. I don't care if it's ADP or any of these organizations that are selling you their HRM systems with AI included. That AI is not based on your values, not based on your policies. It's based on their generic understanding of what's good in a general sense for corporations within a certain legal parameter. So you've got to be really careful about that. And you got to test it and build it for yourself.
So for hiring managers, take a look through the applicant tracking system. Don't just 100% count the people who are in the not a fit bucket. Review them. It takes a few seconds each, maybe a minute. Do it because you might find your diamond. Once
Yep.
you get the folks that are going to be in the behavioral interview, what's an example of how behavioral questions work?
That's good. Good question. So let's say you're looking for somebody who is a problem solver. So you want to therefore never use the word problem solving in the question because the candidate is always looking for, keys of what you're looking for. So if you say, tell me about a time you solved the problem, whether they solve the problem or not, they'll make up a story about solving a problem. So tell me about a time that your team was working on and had a deadline that you were convinced they would not meet. Tell me about a time when you were struggling to understand the assignment. Tell me about a time when there was a bad communication between what the boss said you're to do and what you realized you had to do. Well, they might think that's about communication. They might think that's about relationship building with their boss. And there might be behaviors in there that do come across that way. But what you're seeing is, did they go out? How did they understand there was a problem? Did they understand the problem or was it brought to their attention by somebody else? And even if it was brought to their attention by somebody else, did they take control of it and lead the process of solving the problem? Finding out what was the root cause, what was the options, making a recommendation, whatever those behaviors are you're looking for. And, tell me about a time that no matter what you tried to do, well, here's one for production, which one of my clients said years ago. Tell me about a time where you had to get a product out the door immediately. And what they're looking for is, were you concerned about quality or quantity? Because some people will send it out and say, we'll fix it later, but we met the deadline because if we didn't get it out, there's a penalty, and the penalty is too much money. And therefore we just got it out, even though we know it didn't not work. But your organization says, we'll pay the penalty because quality is more important. And you're saying to this person, yeah, you got it out the door, all right, but not here. So that a good behavioral question is actually ambiguous, because you want the candidate to be able to think about what they actually did. Now, people are going to say, well, there's AI. So before my interview, I know they're going to be asking me questions that might relate to their values. So I go on the website. Let's say the values on the website are accurate. So I asked AI to help me with a question on answering respect or dignity or whatever it might be. And I memorize it, and it sounds great. Well, here's the trick. When you introduce the interview process, you say to the candidate, there'll be times in the interview that you're going to tell me a story which I'm really interested in. And while you gave me references here, it's your mother, it's your uncle, it's your priest, and it's your favorite teacher at school. So you already know they're going to be good references. What I want, and you don't say that to them, but you say, what I want is a reference from inside the experience that you had. So let's say the person tells you a story. It sounds really good. It matches your needs. And you say, could you, who was involved in that with you? Well, my coworker and I did this together. What was your coworker's name? Could you talk to your coworker, please, and let me know when I can contact them, how I can contact them, so I can talk to them about this story. And I've had people say, well, I lost contact with them. They moved out of town. One case, somebody called me up once and said, the candidate said they died. We checked them on LinkedIn and they're alive and well, still working in the company. The only answer I haven't heard yet is they're in the witness protection program. I'll have to kill you if I tell you, kind of thing. That's the only thing I haven't heard. So as soon as you tell them, I call it the honesty factor. As soon as you say, who else was involved? Here's the sad reason I've thought of this. My son did something in undergraduate school with the public schools in the area had a budget cut, and after school programs were eliminated, and teachers were going on strike because they didn't want to cover lunch. So he got his fraternity together and they did the after school programs. They went in for lunch to cover recess outside, and they did all this, and it made the local news, TV and print. Everybody in his fraternity, when they went for graduate school interviews, used that story as if they did it. I said to my son, how do you feel about it? He says, well, two of them got into medical school, one got into law school. He was really happy about the fact that he did something, and he was very proud of it, but also his friends could benefit from it.
He's sharing it.
Well, it wasn't really their behavior or their idea, was it? No. They helped me, but they didn't come up with the idea. And some of them actually fought him on doing it, but got involved under peer pressure. And so I came up with this idea, you better ask for a reference from within the story. And once you do, that person. And the other key thing is, when you ask a behavioral question, tell me about a time when you helped an employee that other managers had given up on. And the person's, let's say, stuck. This is where silence is important. Human beings want to fill time. They want to talk. There's no dead air when you're on a podcast because people have a lot to say. So I say, once you ask a behavioral questions, shut up and count for at least 30 seconds. That is an uncomfortably long time, to which the candidate is going to eventually come up with a story or ask you to move on because they can't. And if you start asking, well, who was involved, what you do, what was the outcome, because people start giving hints to what they want in those cases. And therefore you guide them to give you an answer that you want to hear or they think you want to hear. And then they come up with a good story and you say, wow, that was great. But if you keep mouth shut, and don't ask, never ask who, what, why, when, where, and how at the end of a behavioral question. Tell me about a time where you had to make a choice to get a product out the door to meet a deadline. Don't ask what you do. Don't ask what happened. What was the product? Don't ask anything. Let them tell you their story without guidance. That's the key to success in a behavioral interview. Now, once they tell the story and you want to find out who was involved, you ask who was involved or what was the reaction of your manager, or then you start asking those questions after they told you the basic story.
Your site has a lot of free resources that you give away. Plus, you have books.
Right.
If somebody's thinking about putting this practice into place in their hiring, is there a resource you'd point to say, hey, here's
Yeah,
how you can learn how to do it?
Thank you for that question. My new book, Selecting the Best, fostering a workforce driven by values for lasting success, has at the end of the book an appendix of about 60 different behavioral interview questions. And it's divided by different topics such as teamwork or respect or trust or whatever it is. There's 3 or 4 generic questions there that you can adjust to your specific environment. There's also a guide for how to conduct the interview at the end of the book. And the book itself gives you, the first part of the book is how do you identify the authentic behaviors of the values in your organization? And the second part of the book is how do you apply it? And one of the things that people are taught in doing behavioral interview is that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And I say it's not true. We're not the same people we were in high school or after our first job. So it's about what did they do recently in the last 2 years? They give you a story they did 10 years ago. It sounds great. It meets your behaviors, but for some reason they haven't done it in the last 10 years. Not likely they're going to do it for you. So you want to find stories that are recent and at least 2 stories, different stories in different situations that reflect what you're looking for. So if you have frequent and recent, you've got a great candidate.
As a final nail here, skills versus behavioral values fit. So think of the teller at the money exchange. They've got to have the basic skills, but then the behavioral fit. What is there any of those 2? Is there one that wins?
Yeah, behaviors. You can teach skills and knowledge. You're not going to teach behaviors that fit a value very quickly. And another topic for another day would be, the fallacy of culture change. Because if culture is based on values, when's the last time somebody woke up and decided to change the values just because somebody asked them to? It ain't going to happen. And so if I don't know something, well, think about it this way. You're working with a colleague who knows everything, but irritates you with their behaviors. How do you respond to that person? Yeah, working with a colleague that needs help and has all the right behaviors. How do you react to that person? So when it comes down to it, the skills is the gateway to get seriously considered for the job. Having the behaviors is the foundation for getting the job. So remember that it's an equation: skills, time, knowledge, times behaviors. If any one of those is 0, the conclusion is 0. And, I'm not really good at math. In high school, I took all these college prep courses except math because as my son who used to work with me said once, when there was a situation where I asked people for an answer to a question on a scale of 1 to 10. And somebody said, so what's the average? He says to him, well, don't ask David to calculate it because he's a blithering idiot when it comes to math. So I took, elementary math in high school. So I used to have on this chart, skills plus knowledge plus behaviors equals fit. And one day a young engineering student came up to me and said, no, they can have the skill and knowledge, not the behavior. They still get the job. You want to change that to a times, because if one of them 0, they don't get the job. So I said, that was brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So whoever said that to me, I thank them for that. Believe me, I don't know their names. That's the other thing I don't do well. Names and math and spelling. Thank God for Grammarly.
We can't have all the boxes checked. Right?
No, no, not at all.
Well, you've got the new book coming out. We're going to link to the site where they can get resources and where they could get the books. Appreciate you coming on and giving us the intro and some advanced knowledge on how to create your company values and hire for the fit with the behaviors that match those values.
My pleasure.
Great starting place.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.